It's on. Wonderful. All right. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. My name is Schaffner. I'm the community engagement coordinator here at the store, which involves many things, but luckily for me, it sometimes involves speaking to wonderful authors like tonight's special guest, Judith Rosen. And we hope that you are looking forward to kicking off your Valentine's Day weekend, which is a thing. If it wasn't a thing before, I'm making it a thing right now. Valentine's Day weekend with us, with Bookstore Romance, Love Speaks Volumes. Before we get going, I just want to say thank you so much for being here tonight. You know, we're an independent business, a small business, and stores like ours really can only exist because of the support that readers and community members like you offer us. So thank you for coming to this event. Thank you for any copies of Judith's wonderful book that you buy tonight. And since, again, it is the eve of Valentine's Day, I'll just note that we have some lovely gifts on the other side and a floral pop-up. So feel free to browse at the end of the evening. And so we will be having a signing at the end of this event. So grab your copies of Bookstore Romance, and we'll be lining up right here to get those signed. Before we kick off the questions, it's possible that some of you are not familiar with Judith. It could be. In which case, I would like to introduce you. Judith has worked for a long time in publishing and bookselling, just throughout very extensive experience with Publishers Weekly. She has been to many stores and become a great friend to people all throughout the industry for decades, and we here at the store really appreciate so much of the work that she's done. She has been the longtime bookselling editor and New England correspondent for Publishers Weekly, and some of her interviews and articles have been collected in Writing for Your Life and the Writer's Handbook. And she is very local, living here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Bookstore Romance is a wonderful collection of 23 romances that were either turned into engagements or marriages in independent bookstores. This is a beautiful little book that really brings to light how many kinds of community and love can happen in a place like this. And I'm really excited to talk about it. So please welcome tonight's guest, Judith Rosen. All right, well, hello. Let's see, it should be up. Yes, there we go. Welcome. How does it feel to have your book out in the world?
Very exciting.
Excellent.
I've interviewed so many authors over the years that it's nice to be one of them for a full book. It's not.
Are you working?
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah, this one's a little quiet. Let's try that one. Working, but oh yeah, I don't know what's wrong with that one.
Thank you. Well, maybe you can hear me. So yeah, it's exciting, and it came about because of Sue Raymond, my editor, who is the director of Brandeis University Press. We had worked together on many stories in the days she was at David Godine Publishers, and she said she had this idea for a book about bookselling, and I was like, yeah. And the title was hers from the start, Bookstore Romance. And I just love the idea of love and independent bookstores, which so many of us love, and we're here tonight.
Yeah, I was really interested to see that it was coming out from Brandeis, because Brandeis, being a university press, does lots of kinds of things, but does tend to publish a lot of academic work. And this feels like such a passion project and a little more lighthearted and more gifty if you're looking for things to give people for Valentine's Day and other days too. There are actually 365 days in the year, and romance is good on all of them. So what was it like to work in a press that mostly does other kinds of books with this particular kind of, like, were there challenges in like design and editorial that, from it being a little different?
I think since the world became 5 big houses owning most of the bestsellers list, that many great books have gone to university presses and smaller presses. In fact, if you do look around the shelves, I know I nabbed 2 from a small press earlier before now. So I think it actually fits in with the mission to have a variety of books, and I think it has some local flavor, it has some national flavor, so we'll see how it does. They've done some other gift books. They have a lovely little book with photos of the little ducklings that was put together by the sculptress who did the ducklings, and they're in all their glory throughout the year.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think there's so much more variety in university presses nowadays than people might realize.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, we've gotten many wonderful books from, and it's good that we're able to get those. And you have done, as we talked about, a lot of different things in the world of books. What's your relationship to bookstores? What's your bookstore story?
Well, I'm not proud of this moment, but one time when we needed a mortgage, I went to the Coop, and kind of like taxi driving, or maybe nowadays it would be Uber driving, everybody has worked at the Coop of a certain age. And I worked there too, and as soon as I got we got the notice from the bank that they had accepted our application, I quit my job. It was 6 weeks. That was my first day of bookselling. I did know enough to fix the biography section where somebody had thought it would be nice to rearrange it at lunchtime and do it all alpha by author, which if any of you like to read biography would know, you really want to find it by the person you're interested in. Later on, I did some work with Harvard Bookstore and helped them revive their newsletter. This was many years ago. And I also worked at a store, now no longer there anymore, Wordsworth Books, which in its heyday was the fourth was the 4th bookstore in the country in terms of sales per square foot, which shows you that the turtle often wins the race. And I did all kinds of things for them that were really fun. I started a mail order program. I think we know what's happened with mail order nowadays. I'm sure you all do some too.
Oh, yes.
And I did an author build series. So it was very fun. And then I realized the whole time I worked at Wordsworth and at Harvard Bookstore, I wrote for Publishers Weekly. I would say, hey, you know, in Harvard Square, I noticed this. And they would be like, okay, why don't you write about it? And that's actually how I began the journalism career. And I discovered that I actually preferred writing about what was going on more than I like having to be in an office at a certain time. And since their offices were in New York, I could make my own hours before it became a thing to work at home.
Well, having been at this store for about 10 years, I can definitely say that I understand what it's like to be in love with a bookstore. But this is magically about being in love at a bookstore. Have you seen this sort of event happen more and more frequently, or do you think that people have always gotten engaged and married at bookstores?
I think it's still a bit unusual, but it is becoming more and more of a thing. I've had booksellers who heard about the book tell me, oh, that's what I want at my store. I want a wedding at my store. And when I interviewed folks at the Rip Bodice, which was, to my mind, the first romance bookstore in the US, they opened in 2016, and many people said, how could you have a bookstore that only sells romance books? That's never going to fly.
Sorry.
And we know how wrong they were. And they opened a second store. They would have opened it earlier, but they were stuck because of COVID. They couldn't open it until 2023. And when they did open it in Park Slope, there were lines around several blocks. And the blocks in New York City, the long blocks, are a lot longer than the blocks out here.
And they're square too, which is crazy.
Yes, it is crazy.
Not a city I understand.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you're in the right place.
I think so. So in collecting the stories in this book, was there a romance that you encountered first that sort of started the journey for you?
I actually started looking at photographs because I knew that the photographs had to be good, but the stories also had to be good. It would be hard. I thought it would be harder to find great photographs, but the first photographer I interviewed was actually Warren Lane, who was local to New England, and he was so generous. He sent me all his photos, and I was like, wow, I want them all. And my daughter tells me she wants this guy's shoes. They're really cool. So that was the beginning. And at first we were thinking in terms of what bookstores, but then you just fall in love with the stories. Mm-hmm. You see the picture and you wonder, who are these people? How did they get here? What are they doing? And even just yesterday I was reading, I still get book news that I get through Google. I ask about what's going on at bookstores. And I got this story from Florida. This guy got 2 copies of Pride and Prejudice because he knew the woman he wanted to marry. That was her favorite book. And he cut them out. So it said, "Marry me," and one of them, and the other one, when you opened it, had the ring. And I'm thinking, really?
Well, yeah, we've had our fair share here, a handful. And one of the reasons that you're here is that one of the couples in the book was engaged here a few years ago. Do you want to tell me about them?
Yes, Natalie and Brianna. They met each other before COVID. That's one of the funny things about writing a book now. You have BC and AC, kind of after COVID. So they met and they just were really interested in reading, and one of them just really wanted to read the classics. Somehow I had missed them growing up. I didn't miss all the classics, but I have huge gaps too, so I understand how that could be. And her now wife wanted to help her. One of the great things about this store is you can get books at different price points. So they used to hang out in the used bookseller.
Me too.
And look for all the classics. And they really had a great time doing that. Such a great time that they decided to get engaged. And they staged their engagement photos here because this is where the magic happened, at the bookstore.
Well, and you can see when you get to their page in the book, which is pages 6 and 7, they have this great photo of them each holding a book and facing one another. And you can see they're still working on the classics because they are reading Parable of the Sower and Shirley Jackson, I think.
Parable of the Sower came up a bit in this book because there was a couple who had a destination wedding planned during COVID, and it couldn't happen. They were in Chicago, and they went to the bookstore. They used to, on their dates, end up at the bookstore, Women and Children First. And so when they were talking about this, Women and Children First said, you can get married here, but we have a policy, you have to wear a mask. Also, you have to give a $100 donation to a fund that provides free books for kids, which was no problem. And so science fiction is their favorite thing, and they got married right by that book. And they're both masked, and she's in this beautiful wedding dress, and there's absolutely no one around them. So I asked him, so were you disappointed? And he goes, no, it was so much cheaper than the wedding we had planned.
Well, I think it's kind of nice too if you're getting married in a bookstore. There's no real way to, because I feel like weddings are so bent towards being moments of perfect happiness, and they can't be because they're stressful and they're just part of normal life. They're just an extraordinary day in normal life. But in a bookstore, you have to be a little more open to that because you know that everything behind you is not going to be happy. So it brings sort of a depth of human experience to all of your photos, which I think is kind of neat.
Well, the other good part is if you truly love books, as these people did, of course they picked up 2 books on the way out and purchased them, as long as they were fully masked and everything.
That's so wonderful. So you mentioned the photographers, and I thought that was really interesting because, of course, you weren't at all of these events. So you must have had to work with a lot of photographers in order to collect photos, get rights, learn more about the people who are in the book.
I did work with a lot of photographers, and they were, for the most part, quite generous with their time. And many of them were like, texted me, go for it, or something. And then I would go, how do I reach them? Sometimes I would see a photograph that I just really loved that brought a smile to the face, and I would go, okay, how can I figure out where these people are? And one time I just wrote this blind note, and I said, I think you're this person. Am I right? And they actually wrote back and said yes, and we would do it.
Oh, that's good news.
Yeah.
So that's the photographers. When it came to the couples, how extensive were your interviews? How did you reach out to them? Were people excited to be in touch with you about this project?
Some people were. Natalie and Brianna were definitely excited. One person in the book who got married at Shakespeare and Company, had the proposal at Shakespeare and Company in Paris. The plan was that they were going to have the proposal he was going to set up the proposal in the bookstore, but he didn't know that apparently Shakespeare and Company has a long line of people who want to get into the bookstore. So they went next door and looked at some books next door, and then they came back and the line hadn't just gotten any shorter. So he just dropped on one knee and proposed to her, and everybody in line applauded. And they told me, we did go to the store. We went really early the next day, which was easy with jet lag.
Were there any stories that you heard that particularly surprised you or that have stuck with you more than others?
I think a lot of the stories that surprised me were the lengths that people went to get engaged and to make it a surprise. There was a couple who got engaged at the Rit Bodice in Los Angeles, and they knew they were going to get married when they moved to LA after college, or they assumed that. But when he finally decided to propose, she had already bought herself an engagement ring. Which I thought was kind of expensive, but whatever. And so he had to really plot so he could surprise her. So they were going away on a trip the following week, and she thought that he was going to propose on this trip. So he decided he would propose before the trip, and he knew that she loved the Rip Bodice, that she loved reading romance. So he said, why don't we stop at the Rip Bodice and I'll get you a book. And then when she walked in, there was a table. She started actually looking around, and he's like, no, I think there's a book for you that you might like over on this table, which was a book he had put together with her name on the front, Will You Marry Me?
Oh, that's so sweet.
But he also arranged to have both sets of parents fly into LA, and he called her office and told them she needed the next day off.
Oh my goodness. Honestly, I think if my spouse did that, I would be a little annoyed. But I think the cause was very good in this case.
Did you buy your ring in advance? Did you get your ring in advance?
No, but I also proposed. So, actually, I proposed with a Sander Boynton board book.
All right.
Yes. Your personal penguin. And the question posed in the book is, will you be my personal penguin? And it's all about all the nice things that you do with your personal penguin. And it is technically for 2-year-olds, but I have been married for 11 years. So I think it worked out. Are there any couples that wanted to be in the book, but for some reason it didn't work out?
That didn't happen, but there was one couple who just wanted to be in the. There were couples for whom it didn't work out. For what? Occasionally, it was a photography problem that we had I was working with a photographer who had moved overseas, and she had been in a collective, and so it just became too complicated. The time difference, the trying to work with a whole collective of people to get their permission to use the photo, and then the couple had moved to Ireland. So it was just too much of a tangle.
Logistically horrible.
But it was a lovely proposal at the Strand, which has a rare book room, which is a very popular spot for special parties and proposals.
I'm not surprised. So I think the big question is, why would somebody want to propose or get married at a bookstore? What's so romantic about a bookstore, do you think?
I think it's the stories, and I think it's how you get to meet people. There are stores that do date night at the bookstore, and there are stores that have ways to try to bring people together in very, very deliberate ways. I know I talked to Courtney Flynn for the book, who is co-owner of Trident Booksellers in Boston. And she has this sense that people are alone together in the bookstore, like they will come alone by themselves, but then they meet people. And she has a story about meeting cute with somebody with a little kid whose little car that he was playing with went under this woman's table where she was sipping her coffee, and she bent down to get that little car, and they got married. That was it. Instant family.
That is like fiction. That is beautiful. I love that. And I think that a shared space that's sort of intended to be like peaceful and encouraging and curious is a good place to be open to feeling your feelings deeply. And so I think it's potentially a good place to go with somebody that you already like, and also a good place to go if you decide that you might not mind liking people.
It's also a great place for a date. Like, if you go to a restaurant, there you are, across from the other person, and you're going to have to make conversation. But if you go to a bookstore, you can pull out a book and ask if they've read that, and talk about it. And already you know so much about whether you're compatible or not compatible.
And it doesn't even have to be that you like the same books, does it?
No. It's how somebody relates to it.
Yeah.
And suddenly and sometimes you just find yourself talking. So it's a little bit easier, I think. It takes a little of the stress off.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely way to look at it. I mean, I personally like conversation to have props. I think that's great. And no better props.
Besides Sandra Boyden?
Yes, besides Sandra. I actually get through the day with, I now read longer books too. And that's why they still let me work here. Yeah, I think that learning the way that people think is a good way to decide whether it's somebody that you want to spend a lot of time with. And sometimes watching the way that they get excited is a good way to find out if this is somebody that you want to spend a lot of time with. So it's sort of a crash course in somebody's personality to see them interacting with literature. Well, let's see, I have more questions.
More questions?
Oh, you know what? I did want to talk about bookstore romances in terms of the staff. When you were working at bookstores, did you see any staff couples get together?
Let's see. When I worked at Wordsworth, the owner of the bookstore had married one of his booksellers. And it was a very happy marriage from everything I could tell. One of the couples in the book who really wanted to be in the book got married at their bookstore, but they met at the bookstore. One was the manager and one was a bookseller, but they met at the store, and one of them stayed in books and one of them chose a whole different career after they got married. I think maybe 2 people in the bookstore, maybe it wasn't sufficient income, perhaps.
We
But
won't-
maybe
we
times
won't
have
talk too much
changed.
about that. But, well, I want to say that, so for 37 years, we had a manager at this store named Dana Brigham. Dana is wonderful. She's been retired very happily for the last several years, but luckily she's still in touch with some of us at the store. And so when I knew that we were going to do this event, and I knew a bit about Judith's book, I was thinking about this question of in-store relationships. And I remembered an artifact which she kindly mailed me, which this is a completely innocuous Brookline Booksmith bookmark. And it mentions that we are more than just a great bookstore. We have monthly book club, weekly knitting club, staff recommends section, book-loving booksellers, dogs welcome, and 9 couples have met as booksellers here and married. 6 children so far.
So how many are they up to now? Did she include
Well,
the
she retired and we lost count. But I remembered this and I thought, first of all, I think that's a very funny thing to be keeping track of. But second of all, I think it really speaks to the way that, I mean, obviously in any workplace you can fall in love with somebody that you see every day. But I know we have many people who have met here and stayed together, like since I've been here, many people who have met here and stayed together for a very long time. And I think, again, it's because when you are working in a bookstore, so much of not just your work ethic, but also your interests and your passions become part of your job. So you're really showing more of who you are than you might in some other careers.
See how once you start talking about books, it's all over.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I to ask you if you think that our bookstore is romantic, or if we have any things that we should be doing differently to become more romantic.
More romantic.
More romantic.
That might be right up there with a story I once wrote for Writer Magazine on how to get in the mood to write a romance novel. I think you all do a great job of creating a welcoming space. And I think that, above all, is what makes a store a great store to fall in love.
Well, I really wish that I could talk about this. We are actually working on another proposal right now. I've been talking to a proposer for like a month and a half, and I can't tell you more. I just know that it's going to happen, and so we're living.
Is there a book? Is there a book?
Is there a book?
I never knew that so many people create a book. I don't know
I
how
think
many
that's
people in
really
this
cool.
audience
Yeah.
had their loved one create a special book just for them. I mean, some people hired designers to do the covers. Some people hollowed out the book themselves to get the box in there with the engagement ring. I just was like, wow. Now I know what I should have asked for.
Well, actually, that's a good question. How many, what percentage would you say of these stories do involve some sort of specialized book that was created for the?
I'd say about half of them, at least half of them involved a special book, especially the more recent ones.
That's really interesting.
It seems to be
What
a
has
thing.
changed in book culture?
And several of them are books that have photos of all the things, highlights in their relationship. And I think maybe that everybody having a cell phone, it's much easier to take a photo of a memorable moment and then put those photos together through your computer. But as I said, some people hollow out books, they make book art to say, will you marry me? They do the special cover.
I think it's really nice to have a memento of that moment. I mean, you have the ring, but to a certain degree, the book is more unique.
The engagement in California where Danny, that was his name, where Danny hollowed out the book and put in the ring. She loved that book so much. It lives in their living room, but she brought it to the wedding, and it had, pride of place at the wedding.
That is so beautiful.
So it's really a meaningful memento.
Yeah, and it just shows so much. It shows so much thought, and I think that is.
And a lot of those books ended up, the stores were so kind. At Northshire Bookstore, they put the book in their special events section. So that's where he proposed, in special events.
Oh, that is wonderful. Let's see, I would love to hear some from everybody in the audience. Does anyone have questions? They can be about the book, they can be existential, they can be a proposal. All of these things are available to you.
No proposals, huh?
About the first already academy.
Yes.
So was it used at that ceremony or not?
Oh, yes. She knew he was the one. They met in college. They were both in theater, and she knew right away, which makes sense, they moved to LA, movie industry. So she knew he was the one, and she wanted to wear this ring for the rest of her life. And she wanted the ring that she would want to wear also. I've got the guy, now I want the ring. So he knew about the ring. He knew about the ring. But she actually purchased the ring herself. She picked it out.
think that's both forward-thinking and smart. You're the one who's going to have to wear it forever, so yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead and buy it yourself.
exactly. I had the diamond that was my grandmother's, that my grandfather brought back from South Africa when he escaped from Eastern Europe. So I knew that I had to have that made into the ring, but I didn't have a ring.
Other questions?
I just want to say that the title, Store Romance, is supposed to be the romance of people for each other and also the love of people for bookstores. So it's the romance of the bookstore as well as the romance of the other.
Oh, that's wonderful. In case everyone couldn't hear, essentially the idea behind the title is both about the romance between people and the romance between people and their bookstores. And one thing I did want to note is that I thought it was really interesting that the focus was on independent bookstores, and I wondered if that was sort of incidental because people don't often get engaged at Barnes & Noble, or because there's something that sort of fits the brief
I
and
will
the
say
message.
that no one gets engaged in Amazon.
Are they not amenable
themselves
to it, or
each
is it
other.
just a bad vibe?
I actually did contact Barnes & Noble, but they don't keep records like Dana did. And they told me, I think we had some engagements, but they didn't know where or who, and I wasn't gonna call every single store where, since it's a corporate store.
Yeah, it's challenging. You lose a lot of the narrative, the legacy. It's hard to have a legacy at that scale that's quite as personal. And I think, yeah, again, I think one of the benefits that we have of being a store like this is that, you know, Dana is retired, but she's still around. And we have other people who have worked here for 20, 25 years. So the
And I
memory
still
is
remember
long.
Marshall Smith.
Oh,
I worked
yes,
with him
no,
for many years.
Marshall founded the store in 1961 as Paperback Booksmith. When he
There
was
were
sort of,
multiple
yeah,
stores.
there were many stores for a while. There's just this one now, but it's grown a few times in the last few years. And even until like the last year and a half of his life, he would still come in on a regular basis in his late 80s and do work here in the store. And because he was so dedicated to the project that he had set in motion, and that it has made such a difference to you know, many people in the community, but also to probably thousands of people who have worked here at this point. It's been 64 years, so yeah.
And he so loved books that when he moved to the Cape, he got his local grocery store to put in a shelf of books that he took care of.
Which is still there, I think. I think the books are still in that store.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
In Lovely, yeah. And the Smith family still owns that market, and they still have the books. So there you go. Books belong everywhere.
He was very proud of it the last time I saw him.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, any other questions? Well, the one other thing that I'll bring up is that a thing that I appreciate amongst all of the couples of this book is that they're very different people from one another. So there's this unifying idea that a place that they want to celebrate each other and themselves as a couple is their bookstore. But like they otherwise come from many walks of life, you know.
Now, I have to correct you. One of the couples
Oh.
works for the Booksellers Association, but before that, they were a bookseller, and their wife said, "We are not getting married in a bookstore where you work." Because I know you will go over to the cash register and start ringing up sales.
Incredibly relatable.
So they didn't do that. They went to a friend's bookstore run by, do you know Sweet Pea?
Yeah.
Yeah, they went to Sweet Pea's store. the West Coast. And the store, it was during COVID, and the store was doing deliveries out front and let them take over their bestsellers list space and put in their own favorite books. And do you know that their customers, their wedding guests actually bought books during the wedding? But
That's
Sweet
ideal.
Pea had to ring the register.
That's wonderful. But yes, there's a great diversity of
They are
relationships.
all very different, and as far as I can tell, all the relationships have stuck. I did weed out one of my favorite set of wedding photos, but
I was going to ask if there were any bookstore divorces.
I don't think those people got divorced at a bookstore.
Some sort of binding agreement that if this marriage ends, you have to go back
To the
do it
bookstore
there.
and then do it. No, I don't think so. To the best of my knowledge, all these couples have stayed together.
And that's really impressive too, because the project is recent, but some of the folks in this book have been married for like a decade.
Yes, one of my favorite photos was, I found this photo and I just kept coming back to it, and I said, we have to put this in here. It's a bridal photo, which is a thing in the South. I don't think it's a thing up here particularly, but, and a lot of wedding photo packages in the South, you get your choice of an engagement photo or a bridal photo. And this woman's husband's, her current husband, her now husband, said to her, go for the bridal photo. You're in and out of that store all the time. So she got a bridal photo at Brazos Bookstore in Houston. And that was just, she's in her wedding dress. She changed into her poop. They told her she could do the photos, no problem. It had to be a slow time at the store, which turned out to be a good thing because trying to get changed into a poofy wedding dress took quite a while in a bathroom in a bookstore.
I think there are many things you can say about independent bookstores that are good.
Yeah.
I don't think that typically our bathrooms.
They're not really set up to be a bridal place. So, in the wedding photo, her husband is just a sneaker nut and has a million pairs of sneakers. But she kind of likes them too. So, what I loved about this photo is, my favorite photo is her crouched down and you can see surrounded by her dress, and then she's got her chucks sticking out.
It is so cute. It's one of my favorite photos in the book.
I think they do make engagement shoes or wedding shoes. I didn't realize sneakers were that diversified.
Oh yeah, a sneaker for everything.
Exactly.
And if you're lucky, 20 sneakers for everything.
Yes.
Let's see, I think that kind of comes to the end of the things that I had hoped to talk about. If there aren't any more questions, I'll give you one last shot. All right. In that case, thank you so much, Judith, for writing this book and sharing it with us tonight. And again, if